Hello and welcome to Big Picture. I am Vishal Dahiya, and today we will talk about India's startup ecosystem. Now, India continues to be home to the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. According to a recent report released by NASSCOM, 1,300 tech startups were added up to September this year. Now, while 7 startups entered the unicorn club, taking the total number to 24, potential unicorns also saw a significant increase to 52 from 15 last year. The volume of investment in startups also grew, touching $4.4 million for January to September this year. Now, according to this report, these startups have created estimated 60,000 direct jobs, between 1.3 and 1.8 lakh indirect jobs as well. So what does these numbers reveal? How has India's startup ecosystem evolved over the years, and what needs to be done to keep up the momentum from here onwards? For more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of guests. Let me first introduce these guests to you, beginning with Dr. Subhash Chandra Pandey, former Special Secretary from DIPP, that's Department of Industrial Promotion Policy, with the Government of India. We also have with us Mr. Ramesh Kailasham. He is the CEO of India Tech ORG, somebody who is involved in the entire startup ecosystem. And we're also joined by Mr. R. Chandrasekhar, former President of NASSCOM. Welcome all of you gentlemen to Rajya Sabha TV studios. Let me begin with you, Mr. Kailasham. Let's try and understand what is the report trying to indicate. Now, we have the finer points here. Clearly, the number of unicorns has gone up, the number of startups have gone up, the amount of investment has also gone up, and there is, for everybody to see, the amount of jobs which have been created both directly and indirectly. So, are we heading on the right path here, and is this a good positive sign as far as the startup ecosystem is concerned?
Absolutely. It is a good positive sign if you look at the fact that the numbers are growing, both in terms of the number of startups and the kind of diversity of startups that are coming in this space, especially in the tech space. Now, when you say startup, it obviously does involve a larger ecosystem, but largely if you look at the report, it does focus on the tech startup ecosystem space. And we are seeing, as India Tech as well, when we are looking at this space, we do see a surge in the consumer internet startup space, which is significant contributor both in terms of the kind of investments that it is attracting and in terms of the livelihoods that it's creating, both in terms of direct and indirect. Of the number of startups that I keep interacting, I mean close to around 50 odd startups I meet with the founders, because we represent both the founders and funds that invest in these startups. We do see encouraging signs. There are of course certain regulatory locks to be unlocked further, but the fact that they are growing is a sign that it is in the positive direction.
Okay, we'll come to the regulatory locks also, but if we have reached this particular level, then there must be a reason behind that. According to you, since you're saying you're the one who interacts between the startups and the investors as well, you're there as a link, and you have your finger on the nerve of the industry. So what do you think would have made this possible? Obviously, in addition to the entrepreneur skills of the independent startups.
Well, the positive part in this is the fact that the government is listening and the government is taking proactive steps in the direction. Whether you look at in terms of the angel tax issue, whether you look at the regulatory issues that each of the sector faces. Now, when you look at startups as such, each of them do use the internet as a medium to buy and sell, but at the same time, they are also belonging to certain sectors. Each of these sectors have had their own regulations. The positive part is that DPIIT, the Ministry of Commerce, and right up to the Prime Minister's office is listening to most of the issues that are being put up and taking steps in the right direction.
Okay.
This unlocking, as I feel strongly, as one of the reasons that we are seeing a positive surge, of course, with the fact that the entrepreneurship spirit in the next gen of India is also equally picking up, which is making them actually go for bright new ideas and make it themselves kind of an approach.
Okay, so you're saying that the government has been receptive. We'll go to Dr. Pandey as well, but I would want to bring in one more aspect from Mr. Chandrasekhar here, the former president of NASSCOM. Mr. Chandrasekhar, what do you make of these figures, the facts and figures in the NASSCOM report on the Indian startup ecosystem, and also how or why would you think the numbers are saying what they're saying right now?
Well, I agree with the gentleman who just spoke that I think overall it's a positive picture. And I think the fact that the growth is taking place at the rate it has, and the in terms of employment, in terms of the number of startups, etc., and we are firmly entrenched at the third kind of position. These are all good signs, but I think one has to also look at what is our potential, and we do have a potential to grow even faster. We do have a potential to grow even bigger for a country of India's size. And while being happy to a certain extent with the progress that has been made, that is happening, I think we should also see how can we raise our aspirations, and what are the things that we need to do. So one of the things is that if you look at the data which has come out in the report, which was just a few days ago released, a lot of the focus is on B2B. And this is good in one sense, because the path to profitability is faster and clearer. But I think for a country of India's size, perhaps the B2C market also should be growing, particularly if you look at segments like the social sector, in healthcare, in agriculture, in skilling, and so on. And I think that a lot would need to be done in terms of enabling that market to be opened up by the startups. We have a great strength in the startups. We also see that nearly 20% of the startups are deep tech, using AI, machine learning, data analytics, and so on. And it's a great opportunity for India to become a leader in some of these areas. That will require not only the startups and the entrepreneurship, as well as the funding. And again, on the funding, I think while it has grown only by 5%, whereas perhaps we should be looking at an even faster growth if we are to not only catch up with US and China, which are 10 times bigger in terms of the number of unicorns, for example, but also in terms of creating the kind of values which Chinese startups have created essentially in the B2C space and made their fortune there. That has also helped them to actually build greater technologies. So these are, I think, some of the areas, and there needs to be very active government support of a different nature. I know a lot has been done by the government already, the startup policy, the focus at different levels, right from the Prime Minister downwards, DIPP and all that have been emphasizing on this. But if you look at the market access aspect, then I think it is across the government need for programs and policies to be designed in such a way that startups get access to the Indian market, to the Indian consumer, and are able to build value-added services around core government infrastructure, much the way in which the ecosystem has been built around Aadhaar. So these are, I think, some of the things perhaps that can help to accelerate the pace even more, on top of what I would consider as a pretty good performance in the startup sector, amidst not so strong growth signs in the other parts of the economy.
So those are very interesting and important aspects out there. Let me bring in Dr. Subhash Chandra Pandey here. Dr. Pandey, the numbers are good. The effects and figures clearly indicate that we have moved forward. We've retained our position, but we have also moved forward in terms of new startups, in terms of unicorns as well. Funding has also increased, though by 5%. But all these aspects which you pointed out by Mr. Chandrasekhar there, that tapping new potential in terms of both areas as well as new ways of trying to do things, specifically from B2B to B2C. And there, the government and the government agencies will also have to come in and do some out-of-the-box thinking. So how do you see things moving from here onwards, and what needs to be done?
Vishal, as you recall, this government involvement in this arena started in January 2016 when Prime Minister launched the Startup India Action Plan. And I have been associated in DIPP with this program right from March 16. So I have seen this journey, how we have evolved and reached this day. One thing I can tell you very clearly, that the government has been most receptive to listening to the ecosystem with ears to the ground and changing the formulation systems as and when it has come. Some changes have come early, some changes have come little late, but if you see, when we started in 16, we had say 3-year thing, 25 crore turnover limits. Those have been relaxed now to say 25 crore to 100 crore. 3-year has gone to 10-year. The tax, angel tax used to be a big irritant. Only it has taken a lot of effort on DIPP to work around with this thing to address the concerns of the tax department, which were not entirely misplaced, because the injection of capital above fair market value has been misused by shell companies in the past, and tax department had their legitimate concern. So we had to work around and see how do we differentiate shady shell companies from the genuine startups, what safeguards can be put in place, and then with that we have a company. So I see this, I would like to a small correction to the numbers that I have. The number of unicorns today is 31, I am told, latest, not just 24, maybe just tech startups. And the combined valuation is crossing $100 billion.
Okay.
Now that to put that $100 billion in perspective, if you see the overall market capitalization on National Stock Exchange for all the listed companies, organized corporate sector, is say over to 2200 billion. So this is about 5%, which is a pretty exciting number. If a startup valuation is 5% of the overall market valuation, so that is the perspective, and that is where we are heading. The other thing is that this new economy that we are transiting, it is a increasing servitization of traditional manufacturing, value added. So it is more of a sharing, more of outsourcing, and therefore it's a ripe system for startups to come and entrepreneur. And I would like to address Mr. Chandrasekhar's point. Market access is very important. I think this is the latest intervention from the government side, which is very actively under consideration. We have taken some steps about exempting the startups from furnishing earnest money deposits, etc., experience criteria, which is a usual pre-qualification criteria. Next step will be enabling and asking the ministries to also have certain pilot procurements on an experimental basis. So for that, also the system is under design.
Okay, Mr. Kailasham, one aspect here, and as Mr. Chandrasekhar also pointed out, that focus, and it is quite clear here, has mostly been, majority of the focus of the startups has been on a B2B aspect, and that's obvious as well, in terms of the profit generation. But the more focus area in the future or in the time to come, Mr. Chandrasekhar is suggesting, several other experts are suggesting that the entrepreneurs or the startup entrepreneurs should also look at the B2C segment, specifically in social sector areas, health maybe, agriculture or agri-related products maybe. So how do you see things moving from here to there in terms of entrepreneurship, and what is it that entrepreneurs, the startup guys would require assistance from the government in terms of policy or in some other terms?
So in terms of, if you look at the exact spaces that you mentioned, there are startups in that space who have phenomenally grown over the last 1 year.
Yes.
If you look at healthcare space, I've met at least 3 startups who have done phenomenal job of giving access to patient care, connecting hospitals to the patients, to even services right from a 360-degree perspective of health. So there is certainly a large number of startups who have come in that space. They haven't reached the unicorn status, but they are through various series of fundings as we speak.
And there's a lot of potential.
And there's a huge potential. There's a huge potential, because if you look at, they are going city by city and they are moving into tier 1, tier 2 towns as well. Same is the case with, and there are a bunch of such startups in Bangalore, a bunch of them in Gurgaon and so on. If you look at the consumer internet space, which is what I represent, I meet almost founders on a regular basis who are primarily focused on the consumer, which is the B2C space. B2C, if you, as Mr. Chandrasekhar rightly pointed out, is a huge space. All the big names that you take today globally, whether it's American or Chinese, are B2C ones. The B2B ones are largely product companies or services companies from an artificial intelligence or an analytics and so on. But if you look at the consumer space, here is where the largest chunk lies. Not only because we as an economy have a huge chunk of buyers, we also have a huge chunk of sellers. And therefore, the consumer seller connect is what most of these companies are enabling. From a market standpoint, the funds are looking at investing in these, and the funding is phenomenal. There's a huge amount of employment getting generated, both direct and indirect. Market enablement on the grassroots level is happening, plus the funds are interested in it. The regulatory locks, which I mentioned in my previous comment, also stem from this part on what is that exponential growth, as was pointed out earlier. Is India looking at that? And those are the ones we are also pitching to the government. For example, most of the health startups and startups in the consumer space, the next stage when they grow, obviously the funds look at them to get listed sometime. Unfortunately, because you are on a consumer internet space, you are on a constant consumer acquisition mode, and therefore you may not be able to show profitability immediately. You may not have net assets because you are asset light companies, and at the same time your promoter would have diluted equity beyond the 20% mandatory requirement for listing. So because listing norms are a catch there, and we have been working closely with SEBI in this regard, differential voting rights, listing norms, all of these are to be eased if you want to see Indian companies founded in India not to list abroad. And as it was mentioned earlier, the market capitalization of these companies, assuming by in next 2-3 years we hit 100 unicorns, we are talking about close to 200 billion market capitalization and valuation. That should be sitting inside the country in the listed stock exchanges of India. Those are the kind of regulatory unlocks which are very critical and quick moving right now. If we do not want to see funds forcing their founders to say that, look, India is not open, so let's list somewhere else, and therefore the holding company concept and the foreign listing kicks in. As far as access to market is concerned, we have been working closely to enable the market, and we did raise this with the government of India in 2018, where we said that the startup should have access to the GEM portal, which is the government e-marketplace. And then the government did respond, and it has been opened up for as far as fixed price products are concerned. We are working closely with GEM on opening the dynamic price products, which are on a fluctuating basis, like an airline ticketing or a hotel and so on. The government is looking at that. Now, these are market enablement, because if you say the startups are currently looking at consumers, the government is also a C in this, despite being the B2G part of it. The government as a consumer is also a huge market which many startups are keen to explore and work with. Apart from that, of course, there are certain regulatory locks in the GST taxation space, which are getting addressed one by one. Each of that can unlock the sector in a big way.
Dr. Pandey, issues like this, the listing norms are something which is pointed out by Ramesh here. How can we go ahead and look at those aspects, the government specifically in terms of its policy intervention, because this is, an area where the potential needs to be tapped.
Yes, this differential voting right is one for protecting domestic founders. That is basically under policy dialogue, and we should see how quickly it is resolved. Our capital market in terms of its regulatory environment is one of the best in terms of protecting minority shareholders' rights, and so we should be seeing more corporate sector developments on these lines, where the startups are facilitated and their founders' interests are protected against hostile acquisitions or unfavorable acquisitions. I'm hopeful on that.
Mr. Chandrasekhar, your views on this aspect, specifically looking at listing norms and how the interest of the promoters can be protected, specifically when we are looking at the B2C segment or even the B2G, which Ramesh is talking about.
Yeah, I mean, these are all extremely important considerations, and how you enable founders to not only capture but retain the value of their innovation and what they have created is important. And while, as Mr. Pandey mentioned, these are subject to ongoing policy debate, it's obvious that government needs to do something to protect the founders. But if you go overboard in that direction, then you will choke investment. So a proper balance has to be maintained so that while the founders' interests are protected, the flow of investment into the sector is retained.
Okay.
So that's one important aspect that has to be kept in mind as the founders' interests are protected. That's critical also because continuing innovation requires deeper understanding of the Indian market, and an early acquisition, especially if it is not from an Indian company, might lose some of that flavor. But an additional aspect of this is a lot has been talked about the regulation from the point of view of listing, from the point of view of certain benefits, and so on. And DIPP clearly has done a lot of work in that regard. But if you look at some of the regulatory bottlenecks outside of the DIPP and the Finance Ministry and the SEBI and RBI and so on, you look at areas like healthcare, for example. In the healthcare space, there are many regulatory constraints preventing remote care. So as a result, we are not quite able to derive all the benefits that new technology offers.
Okay.
If you look at medical supplies, then there is a whole legal framework under e-pharmacies, which is still doing the rounds.
Okay.
More importantly, the design of schemes. If you look at, say, Ayushman Bharat itself, while there are so many different elements on the healthcare side, to what extent has the innovation capability that is available in the startup ecosystem in healthcare space, which was referred to,
Okay.
been built in as a central feature of that program.
Okay.
Let me also add that, the traditional approach of saying, okay, let's procure and open it up and allow startups as a favor done to them by either giving some exemption from eligibility criteria or number of years, etc. That, to my mind, will have a very limited impact.
Okay.
What needs to be done is to actually identify appropriate startups and actually have a partnership with them, which should not be difficult because it does not call for investment by the government.
Okay.
All it requires is to enable certain services associated with core government programs,
Okay.
and allow the startups to intermediate them through value-added services.
Okay. So the government
And
playing
these kind of changes and this kind of change in the thinking, I think, is particularly critical.
Okay.
Because from that, arises valuations, listing, investment.
Okay.
All of those will happen much faster.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Chandrasekhar, I understand your point of view as in, government playing the role of the enabler there as well. Dr. Pandey, your views quickly. We've running short of time.
Basically, what we just discussed about the DVRs and the listing norms, etc. I want to highlight one particular dilemma that the government faces in this policy debate. It is that we do not want a full-fledged corporate governance norms that we apply across the board for all companies. On the other hand, the conflict between founders and investors, as we have seen some of the high-profile cases, how to see that the corporate governance is also up to the satisfaction of the investors.
Okay, so that's also a very interesting and important aspect there. Last word from you, Ramesh, and in terms of, how do you see, now that we are here where we've reached, and from here onwards, if you look at the key focus areas and the key sectors, the watch out sectors, if I must say, in the startup ecosystem, where things are likely to move at a very fast pace, and all stakeholders, including the entrepreneurs, the investors, and the government also, will need to put their best effort there.
Well, one of the things I would like to highlight here is the fact that if you look at the startup ecosystem and we look at it sectorally, there's no homogeneity between the center and state. And therefore, what startup does well in one state doesn't do well in other state because it could be banned in that state. I think one thing that we would like to see is clarity between both center and states, pan-India as one India, one market. We would like to see that startups actually don't suffer state to state.
Homogeneity is
The
what?
homogeneity is something I would like to highlight as a critical point, and therefore recommendatory guidelines from the center which is adopted by states could be one way to solve a lot of those regulatory challenges which are teething problems on the ground for most of the startups.
Okay, so there it is, as our experts and panelists have pointed out, that India's startup ecosystem has established itself, and the facts and figures year after year point out the work which has been done by the entrepreneurs, the investors, as well as the government through its policy and through the fact that it has been receptive. But there are miles to go, and all stakeholders will have to work together to try and evolve new strategy to tap all the potential they can. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic and different set of guests. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha Television.